What's up, fam? Smash the like button for the algorithm and let's get started with the story. Vire van Baskerville served as a puppet and hunting dog of the noble house of Baskerville, following all the cruelties in his life for his family and father. However, he was unjustly accused of conspiring with a demon and ruthlessly executed as a victim of betrayal. Taking his last breath, Vire decided that if he got a chance at a new life, he would no longer follow the path of a pathetic hunting dog. By some miracle, Vire opened his eyes again and saw babies lying in cribs around him. He couldn't understand where he was or what was going on around him. The constant crying of the children and the heaviness in his body led Vire to think that his possible location was hell, where his soul had gone after the execution. However, the boy soon realized that he was not in hell but in a place he knew well, the mansion of the Baskerville family, where his former life had been destroyed. Earlier, the head of the family, Hugo La Baskerville, came to the nursery and scornfully examined the infants, calling them insignificant creatures unworthy of attention. Passing by the row of cribs, the man noticed that among all these children, there was not a single worthy one who could really interest him. But suddenly he stopped at one of the cribs where there was a baby he thought was different from the others, and this baby attracted him because it was the calmest. Hugo La Baskerville then ordered his servants to carry all the infants to the cradle of blades, where each child must pass a test. Vire, who found himself in the body of an infant, quickly recognized young Hugo La Baskerville as the man who had been the main culprit of his death in his previous life. Vire was flooded with memories of the past and remembered being a Baskerville hunting dog, growing up in harsh conditions as an illegitimate child. He did the dirtiest jobs of spying on threats, also that the seventh generation of the Baskerville family would become the strongest and most powerful in history. The reason for Hugo La Baskerville's kindness was simple. He cared only for the recognition of his family and the fact that his power was unquestionable and stable. 10 years had passed since the opening of the gates of the underworld. The battle ended in victory for humanity, but Vire was betrayed and executed, putting his life on the line. Lying in his crib, the boy was seized with anger and a desire for revenge against those who had ruined him. However, as an infant, he realized that so far his chances were nil. But when he heard that the babies were going to be sent to the Cradle of Blades, he realized that this was his chance to become stronger and gain the power he lacked. The Cradle of Blades was one of the trials for the children of Baskerville, where they were thrown into a maze of sharp swords to prove their mettle. At the end of the labyrinth was the river Styx, which, according to legend, could turn a child's body into steel. However, not all babies could reach that river. To get to the river Styx the fastest, the children needed to pass directly through the dangerous barrier of spiral blades. Remembering how in his past life his own brothers had prevented him from reaching the river, Vire decided that now things would be different. Watching the ordeal, Hugo La Baskerville and the rest of the family watched in amazement as one of the children was able to pass through the swords and jump into the Styx. While in the water, Vire decided that he would stay there as long as possible to receive the blessing of the river Styx, for its waters changed his body down to the bones. As the air began to run out, Vire began to feel unbearable pain but decided to endure it to get all the power the river could give him. Mr. Hugo's servants became concerned, fearing that the boy might not survive if he stayed in the water too long, and offered to get him out. Hugo went to the manager, John Barrymore, and asked how long the child had been in the river, to which he replied that it had been about 7 minutes. The head of the Baskerville family assumed that Vire would not be able to get out, but when he came to the water and saw him, he ordered his son to swim to the surface. Hearing his voice, Vire decided not to give up and drank as much water from the river as he could to absorb all the power of the Styx available to him at that moment. His breathing began to falter, but Vire continued to think only of how to stay underwater as long as possible, despite the hellish pain. When Hugo pulled his son out of the water, he was very surprised that the child had not just dipped into the water for strength, but had decided to absorb it to become stronger. Hugo then asked Supervisor Barrymore what the name of the child he was holding was, and the man replied that the child's name was Vire van Baskerville. Looking at the unconscious boy, the head of the clan noted that his son was born determined and greedy for power, which clearly set him apart from other children. The boy decided to follow a secret path to build up his strength and power so that at the decisive moment, he could eliminate Hugo and put an end to his long suffering. Vire van Baskerville vowed to wipe the house of Baskerville off the face of the earth with his own hands to avenge all that happened to him in his past life. In his past life, it was known to many that the illegitimate son of Hugo La Baskerville possessed outstanding talents and incredible abilities. Already at the age of 8, the boy was dubbed a genius for his high merits, although in his family he still continued to be considered a common and second-rate child. By the age of 20, Vire had begun to fulfill the tasks of spying and eliminating all undesirables, but this did not rid him of his feelings of inferiority. By opening the gates to the underworld in his 30s, Vire caused an invasion of demons that he fought, destroying those by the hundreds, which led to the conclusion of the great battle. However, at the age of 40, Vire was rewarded for his devotion as a hunting dog, but his reward was false accusations and execution by guillotine. Upon opening his eyes, Vire realized that he was back in the crib in the nursery. Hence, his ordeal in the river Styx had been quite successful. Rolling over onto his stomach, Vire realized that his new start in this life was better than the previous one, giving him an advantage he didn't have before. Suddenly, a strange woman entered the room with a beautiful box in her hands. The nanny asked the woman for what purpose she had brought the box to Vire's cradle. Without answering, the lady left the box and exited the room. Afterward, Vire thought that gifts were never given to illegitimate children and suspected something was wrong. Left alone with the box, the boy saw a bloody mamba crawling out of it, and this poisonous snake headed straight for him, preparing to strike. Looking at the snake, Vire remembered that only a few women of the Baskerville family were given the title of My Lady, and realized that this was an attempt on his life. Assuming that all the children in the cradle could be harmed, the boy decided to confront the snake before him to prevent tragedy in that room. Vire was the first to attack, grabbing 2 snakes by the heads to mercilessly disarm them, for he had sworn that he would destroy all who stood in his way. The next day, the servants of the Baskerville family came to Vire's cradle and were astonished to find the child sleeping under the bodies of torn, breathless snakes. Looking into the cradle, the servants saw the peacefully sleeping baby, who was in no way bothered by the remnants of the poisonous creatures. Rumors about him quickly spread. That same day, all the nannies working the night shift were subjected to brutal interrogations, but it was impossible to find out how the snakes ended up in the baby's cradle. Only Vire knew the truth about what had happened that night, and he wasn't going to share that information with anyone around him. 8 years had passed since that incident, and Vire sat in class with the other children, listening intently to the teacher, who began to explain the topic of sword masters. Looking at the students, the teacher talked about the classification of swordsmen, saying that beginners don't know how to use mana, while experts can control it. The teacher went on to explain that graduates were already able to emit liquid aura from their swords, while masters could turn mana into a solid substance. Masters, on the other hand, were those people who were able to alter mana and control it as they wished, making them some of the strongest swordsmen of all. Then the teacher noted that Hugo La Baskerville was a master of the sword, which amazed the students very much because such people were very rare. Realizing that Hugo already possessed incredible strength, Vire decided that he needed to urgently regain his strength to be ready for the upcoming battle. Suddenly, the teacher noticed that Vire was thinking and was once again convinced that the boy who had received the gifts of the river Styx stood out from the other students. Looking at him, the teacher thought that Hugo would be happy about his son's development if he knew about it, but the boy was thinking about how soon he would be able to eliminate his father. At the same moment, 3 boys looked at Vire angrily, and it was obvious that their intentions were not friendly. After class, the trio took Vire to the storeroom and, calling him a half-breed, claimed to know of his bastardy and began to humiliate him. The boys also mentioned that he was rumored to have spent 7 minutes in the river Styx, and that while still an infant, he was able to destroy poisonous snakes in the cradle. Looking at these tomboys, Vire remembered that they had haunted him in his past life and that it was they who had bullied him after the false accusations. The brothers' names were High Bro, Middle Bro, and Low Bro, and they were known as Hugo La Baskerville's Trident, each 1 year older than Vire. The boys accused Vire of lying and said that he did not like them. Realizing that friendship with them would not be possible in this life, he decided to eliminate them. Suddenly, one of the brothers held a knife to Vire's face, saying that if his body was really like steel, he would be safe from being stabbed. Brother High Bro beckoned to Low Bro, and he immediately knew what to do, quickly grabbing Vire and blocking his breath, intending to abuse him. Vire immediately assessed the level of their cruelty, and made sure that the rumors about them were true. These annoying brothers knew no mercy. After 3 minutes, the brothers were worried, for they did not believe in the delusional legend of the river Styx, and were sure that the boy would not last long. But even after 10 minutes, Vire continued to hold on, and the brothers were horrified at what was happening. Realizing that the legend was true, they began to panic. Low Bro, who continued to hold the boy, refused to believe in the veracity of the legend and did not want to let go of him. But Vire also continued to stand still, realizing their precarious position. In the situation, the brothers asked Low Bro to let Vire go because there was no point in their actions anymore. Letting go of the boy, Low Bro suddenly realized something terrible had happened and looked at his hand in horror, screaming in terrible pain. Vire immediately grabbed his hand, and when the brothers asked him what he had done to Low Bro, he immediately spat out their brother's finger, wiping the blood from his face. Vire smiled wickedly and reminded them that it was the brothers who first got to him and started using dirty methods. However, the two brothers said they were not afraid of Vire, but Low Bro was not so confident in his abilities because he had lost a finger and was very scared. The brothers didn't take it for granted to support Low Bro and said they would later go to the priest to have the finger put back in place, but Vire said they wouldn't leave. One of the brothers was angry at the words Vire had spoken and immediately attacked him with a knife, trying to punish him for his insolence, shouting that Vire was a year younger than them and trying to show his superiority. His brother stabbed Vire in the stomach. However, the attack was useless, as the knife only cut Vire's clothes but did not do any damage to him thanks to the effect of the river Styx. After knocking the knife out of the boy's hand and breaking him, Vire reminded him that in the Baskerville family, age is of no importance, for strength and talent are more important. Looking angrily at his opponent, and not letting go of his hand, the boy offered to have fun, hinting at a continuation. The frightened brother cried out in fright, asking if the rumors of his power were true, but he never got an answer from Vire. Deciding not to explain anything to the boy, Vire immediately struck a strong blow to the boy's face, knocking him to the floor. The brothers froze in fear as they saw High Bro collapsed on the floor with a broken nose, worried for their lives and not understanding what they should do next. But one of the brothers decided not to hold back his rage and prepared to avenge his injured brother, clenching his fists and ready for a fight. Before Middlebro could even lift a finger, Vire had already knocked him to the floor with a single leg kick, leaving him with no chance to retaliate. Realizing that Vire was not joking, the brothers screamed in fear, but the boy told them not to worry because they would be fine once they were treated. Picking up one of the brothers' knives from the floor, Vire said he wouldn't let them out of the room anytime soon, and if they resisted, they would be left crippled. Holding the knife in his hands, the boy still decided to change the rules of his game, saying that he would be magnanimous and let one of the brothers out of the room. The frightened brothers asked which of them he would let out, but Vire threw a knife in front of them and hinted that it was up to them to decide among themselves. Leaving the room, the boy turned around and said that he wasn't going to wait long, and that they should decide sooner if they wanted any of them alive. The brothers looked at each other apprehensively, and began to argue, for they really thought that only one of them would be able to get out of the room alive. Standing outside the door, Vire listened to the brothers fight, and was glad that he had been able to sow discord in such a friendly and unbreakable trident of Baskerville. Sometime later, Barrymore was giving an account to Hugo of the ruby mines, where the bloodshed of the Morgue family had taken place for those claiming ownership. Hugo replied that Morgue would soon come to the negotiations and asked if there was any more news, to which Barrymore replied that Vire had won first place in the calligraphy contest. The head of the family was pleasantly surprised by this news and his son's success, and asked the superintendent when the school children would have their practical test. Barrymore responded that the tests would take place in 5 days and that right now the young knights were on a mission trip preparing for those visibly nervous. The steward also informed Hugo of the recent big fight that had taken place among his descendants in the palace. Hearing this, Hugo was very surprised and asked the manager if there were any casualties in the situation. The man replied that there were no casualties, but that High Bro lost his teeth, Middle Bro had his jaw damaged, and Low Bro had lost the index finger on his left hand. The manager said that treatment was provided, but the brothers had psychological traumas. The head asked how it happened to those who were very friendly. Barrymore surprised Hugo by answering that it was because of the winner of the calligraphy contest, Vire, who brought the brothers to this state. The boy was then called into Hugo's office to discuss the fight, and he was very calm and ready to be questioned by his father. Upon seeing the boy, the head said that he had grown a lot, and Vire greeted his father, calling him Mr., which surprised him. Looking at Vire, Hugo said that he had heard that he had hurt the 3 brothers, to which the boy replied that he had heard that they had been treated. The head looked at his son and said that the problem lay in the boy's mental traumas because since that moment, the brothers no longer communicated. They were told that the 3 brothers did well in their exams, but they stopped eating together and talking, and the relationship between them soured after that incident. Hugo asked Vire if he thought his behavior was inappropriate because it was because of him that the quarrel had started, but the boy would not admit his guilt. Vire confidently stated that he considered himself much stronger than his brothers and did not admit his guilt because strong people do not make mistakes. The man then asked his son if he felt guilty because the brothers had recently visited him and said they forgave the boy generously. Vire smiled haughtily at hearing the words of forgiveness and remembered an incident from his past life. In the past, the last surviving daughter of the Baskerville family, being a nun, came to Hugo and told him that she forgave him for all his sins. Hugo looked at her with contempt and cruelty and answered her words with that single phrase, with a crazed look. Vire uttered the very phrase Hugo had said. Forgiveness is just an excuse for weak people who are incapable of revenge. Hearing his son's words, the head immediately recognized the motto of the Baskerville family and praised the boy for remembering this important truth. With that, Hugo smiled contentedly and turned to Barrymore with orders, pointing to Vire. He told him to bring him any snacks he wanted but warned his son not to be greedy and take as many as he could carry. The boy thanked his father, calling him Mr. again, and asked if he could have the chocolate. Then Vire and Barrymore headed for the exit, but suddenly Hugo addressed the boy again, calling him son. Looking after the boy, the man wished him good luck and told him to do well in the upcoming midterm exam. In conclusion, Hugo smiled and said that Vire had no right to lose to his relatives, but Vire did not consider the words of the head sincere because he understood that he was treated as a consumable. He clenched his teeth in anger and said that he would try. Soon, Barrymore and Vire arrived at the warehouse where the chocolate was stored, which was enjoyed by the female gourmet of the Morgue family. After looking at the shelves, the manager said that it was hard to get such a product, but Vire replied that he didn't want ready-made processed chocolate. Turning and looking at the cooks, the boy asked for the most flavorful cocoa beans to be brought to him. Manager Barrymore and the cooks looked at Vire in surprise, not understanding why he needed beans. Soon, the boy was brought a bag of red-flavored beans known as blood beans. While Vire tasted the beans, the cook told him that this kind of bean was very flavorful and that just one piece could make up to 100 liters of chocolate. Barrymore didn't notice the boy's bitterness and decided that he just liked chocolate so much that he ate the bitter beans raw. Looking at the boy, the manager thought that he was really an unusual and exceptional person for choosing only beans, although he could have taken something more valuable. The cook then asked if the beans needed to be processed for Vire, but the boy said he would take them as they were. Fixing his glasses, Barrymore thought that Vire had a rather strange preference for his age since children usually like sweet chocolate. However, the boy did not need the beans for consumption because he was going to use them for a practical test that would take place in 5 days. Vire already knew that on this particular day, something unprecedented and something no one expected would happen in the Baskerville family. The Baskerville family was known around the world as the Berserk family because of the harsh upbringing their children were subjected to from an early age to develop physical strength. Children had to run up steep hills and were not allowed to rest or sleep before a set time to adapt to the harsh conditions. The cave, he would be able to claim the treasure. Instead, he was haunted by the guilt of his actions and the loss of his brother. The letter ended with a warning to future generations about the dangers of greed and the consequences of betrayal. Vire, deeply affected by the story, realized the weight of the legacy he was inheriting. He understood that the allure of the treasure could lead to dire consequences, just as it had for Gain and Abel. With a newfound sense of purpose, Vire decided that he would not let greed dictate his actions. Instead, he would use the knowledge and power he gained to protect others and honor the memory of those who had come before him. As he stood in the glowing hall, Vire felt a surge of determination. He would not only seek the treasures of the dungeon but also ensure that he would leave it with his integrity intact. With that thought in mind, he approached the glowing ruby, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that he would do so with honor and courage. This cave, he still didn't get what he wanted. After much regret, the man decided to leave this dungeon and leave a message to his descendants to protect them from a similar fate that befell him. Gain strongly advised to get out of this dungeon at once because this bloody lair only mocks people who will get nothing here. Disappointed, Fakir realized that the man meant to say that he had come all the way here and was left with nothing, but he didn't have a twin brother. Then the boy thought that the essence of the assignment did not change from this, and most likely Gain and Abel did not decipher the assignment correctly. As Vire continued to think hard about this task, he was sure that there were no impassable dungeons. As he approached the skeleton, a shadow reflected from its body. Then he realized what the answer was and how stupid the brothers had been. Because they were two of them, they were stereotyped and couldn't come to a decision. The correct answer to the question was in the postmonial itself, with a light-colored stone cave contrasting with the dark corridor on the way to the cave. The man is swallowed up by the darkness in the corridor, but upon entering the cave, he encounters the light of the ruby and splits into two, casting his shadow. When darkness falls again, the last level of the stone cave is opened, and recognizing that the answer was a shadow, the boy broke the ruby with his hand. After Vire shattered the red stone, the shards of it floated up and began to emit a mysterious energy, and a bright red-pink light. Looking in front of him, Vire realized that it was the relic of the Devil's Lair that had caused the brothers to fight and risk each other's lives. From the shards arose a mysterious sword called Beelzebub, and on the pedestal, it was stated that only a man of the Baskerville family would be able to pull it out. When he saw the sword, Vire wondered if it was an artifact for remembering his past life. As a child, he had seen references to it in the pages of a mythical book. According to ancient myths, the voracious fly Beelzebub was an unprecedented demonic monster that invaded the continent. It was said that the world had been swallowed up by a terrible demonic constellation known to all as the Seven Great Disasters. Then the heads of the 7 clans opposed to prevent the 7 great calamities, and each of them dealt with a demonic constellation. The demonic constellation with which Fade, the head of the Baskerville family, was exactly the constellation of gluttony called Beelzebub. The remains of the defeated Beelzebub were kept in the estate of the Baskerville family, and based on legend, it was said that these remains could summon other demons. In the end, the legend was true, and the sword fell into the wrong hands, causing a great number of people to fall on the battlefield. Grasping the hilt of the sword, Vire said that this would not happen in this life, for this sword would now be his property. Suddenly, the sword turned into streams of infernal energy, and having lost its physical shell, enveloped the hand of the boy who had not expected such a turn of events. The energy began to ebb and flow into Vire's body and was soon completely consumed by it. Then, a demonic sword that was one with his body emerged from the boy's hand. Upon reuniting with the weapon, Vire rejoiced that this sword was made from the demonic constellation Beelzebub, and realized that he was very lucky to get his hands on it. Looking at the sword and rejoicing in his success, the boy wondered how strong one could become in this life with this weapon. Looking around carefully, Vire realized that there was nothing else of value in the cave, and it was time for him to leave. Suddenly, the boy felt something strange, for inexplicable things began to happen to his body. As he fell to the floor, Vire couldn't understand what he was feeling at the moment, for it was like intense hunger and dizziness at the same time. The demonic sword that had penetrated the boy's hand began to make eerie sounds, begging to be fed. At last, the exhausted boy got out of the cave, but a terrible hunger continued to disturb him, and his sense of smell increased because of his appetite. Suddenly, the sword possessed Vire's hand and pointed it in the direction from where the smell of food was coming from. The boy, unable to fight Beelzebub and influenced by it, headed down the path he had been given. Soon, the demonic weapon led him to the lifeless body of a hellhound, whom the boy had eliminated a little earlier. Beelzebub immediately pointed his blade at the monster's body and began sucking the blood of the one, and at that moment, the boy's damaged organs began to recover. Vire suggested that the soil and trees of Red Mountain might have dried up because of Beelzebub's hunger, and now it was necessary to quench his thirst because they depended on each other. Soon, Beelzebub was satiated, and one of the sword slots filled with Hellhound's blood, and the boy realized that he possessed a secret skill. There were rumors that Beelzebub had the ability to absorb enemy skills, and the scale of his absorption was close to infinity, so many people were deprived of their skills. However, at the moment, the number of skills that could be acquired was limited to 3, and the first one was Hellhound's skills. After realizing this and seeing it for himself, the boy understood that he could now adopt the skills of other creatures. Then Vire looked unseeingly at the nearby lifeless body of Cerberus, also fallen by his hand. In the next second, sensing the presence of food, the demonic sword reasserted itself and headed towards Cerberus's body to drink his blood. Sighing heavily, the boy told Beelzebub that he should not eat the monster whole because if the body was damaged, it would be difficult to explain what happened to his prey. Seeing that the demonic sword wasn't going to stop in devouring blood, Vire struck at Beelzebub and ordered him to finish his meal. Then the boy saw that all 3 slots were filled. One had Hellhound's blood in it, the second had Cerberus's burn skill, and the third had fast regeneration. When Vire saw the rat lying under the monster's body, he realized that its fast regeneration had come from the demon's sword that drank its blood during Cerberus's takeover. After picking up the rat by the tail, Vire realized that the burn skill he had picked up from Cerberus was quite useful because one of the worst kinds of pain for humans was burning. Looking at Cerberus's body, the boy thought that most likely the monsters for the test had already been prepared and it was worth waiting for the test to be completed since he had already done the task. Soon, the practical test was completed, and all the wounded and tired young men went back to the Baskerville family mansion. But the test was not over, and some of the bodies of the monsters that had fallen during the test were turned into shields and swords and given to the participants as trophies. One of the bodies brought in by the young hunting dog horrified all the Baskervilles present. This shocking information reached Mr. Hugo Law Baskerville, who could not believe his ears. Barrymore reported to the head that the 8-year-old Mr. Vire had crossed the boundary of the safe zone and then attacked Cerberus with a high threat level. The manager added that the monster had been eliminated as it had originally been badly injured by the barbarians, and then poisoned by the boy using a strong poison. No one knew where Vire got the poison from, and he didn't give any more details, saying that he was tired and went straight to the dormitory. Hugo smiled, thinking that at such a young age, the boy already knew how to lie, but at the same time, he had information, and information was a power that had a price. Barrymore was surprised that such a talented boy was born to an ordinary woman and a prefix to the surname Van and not Law, as the head. To which Hugo replied that he did not know. Hugo said that he is different from the previous heads of the family, and when breeding hunting dogs, he does not look at the pedigree of those because the main thing is talent and courage. Barrymore thought that the head might be so worried about his second son, who, as a pure blood, was not distinguished by these qualities and was already preparing for isolation training. After this conversation, Hugo ordered the young Vire to be summoned to his office, and he soon arrived at his door. Hugo said he was aware that Vire had eliminated Cerberus on the interim test, and asked how the boy had managed to do it. Keeping calm, Vire replied that he did it thanks to the chocolate he put down Cerberus's throat because it is poison for dog-like monsters. Listening to Hugo's speech, who realized that Vire had asked to be given chocolate for that reason, Barrymore thought that the head was doing a bad thing by pelting his son with such questions. Looking menacingly at the boy, the head of the clan asked him why he had not answered questions about the attack on the monster earlier. Looking intently at Hugo, the boy said he would answer only to his master, and no one else. The man asked Vire who his master was, to which the boy replied that being part of the Baskerville family, he considered his master to be the head of the Hugo family. Hugo was pleased with the boy's words and said he would give him all the monster bodies from his hunt at the exam and anything else he wanted as a reward for first place. Realizing that he could get what he wanted, Vire decided to use this opportunity and said he wanted to go to Manson's library. Much to the surprise of Hugo and Barrymore, this library was a huge repository of books located in the center of the Baskerville family mansion and ranked at the top of the entire empire. Hugo asked how the boy dared to ask this, knowing that only blood relatives of the head or heads of the clan could enter. Without abandoning the thought of sneaking in there secretly, Vire replied that he was willing to retreat if the head wouldn't allow it. Suddenly, however, Hugo agreed and sent him to the deepest part of the library to read a book called The Six Fangs of the Baskerville. Vire was amazed because previously none of the illegitimate second-rate children of the family were allowed to read this book, and could not even reach the 4th level. The boy realized that he had level 6 in the past, and the head was now at level 7, but the Hugo from his past life could bear as many as 9 fangs. Vire couldn't forget how despised he had been in his previous life because of his bloodline, so in this life, he was determined to surpass Hugo. The boy realized that he now had the opportunity to receive a study guide from the head of the rural generation of Baskerville, who had defeated the 7 disasters. Looking at his son with excitement, Hugo Law Baskerville ordered the boy not to fail his expectations, for it was he who had given this rare opportunity to Vire, implying that the chapter had not yet realized the value of the other books in the library. The boy looked at the man and said he would try to live up to the expectations. After talking to Hugo Law Baskerville, the boy went to the mansion library, and as he approached the doors of that library, he saw 2 guards in front of the entrance. Walking through the library doors for the first time, Vire was overwhelmed with unimaginable emotions and found it hard to believe that this was happening in reality. As he approached the bookshelves and saw the titles, the boy realized that here were many books he had wanted to study in his past life. The Baskervilles' policy was not to allow future hunting dogs to bare their fangs to their master, so second-grade offspring were not allowed to exceed the 4th level of swordsmanship. Finally, Vire found the book he needed, which was chained and guarded like a treasure. Taking out the key that opens this book, the boy said that he never dreamed of such a thing in the past and never thought that Hugo would recommend a book about the 6 fangs. Turning the key in the keyhole, Vire assumed that Hugo might think that a child of 8 would not read the entire book in a day and so allowed it. Having studied levels 1 through 4 of swordsmanship in his past life, the boy had never been able to create a 5th fang without true knowledge of the 5th level. The sword arts of this kind were divided into levels. The first level was the first fang, and so on, and the appearance of fangs was accompanied by a black color. However, Vire was not interested in level 6. His real purpose for coming to the mansion library was something else entirely, for he longed for a higher level. Soon, the boy came to the entrance of the library where the guards were standing, and they looked at him in surprise, asking him if he was going to leave the place. Then they told him that the sword manuals were deep inside, and if the boy forgot something, they could bring him the right book. Vire replied that he wanted to read a few more books before he left, so the guards could ignore him and go about their business. Seeing the boy heading for the 2nd floor where there were only collections, the guards said that given the opportunity, it would be better for him to read books on sword wielding. The guards looked at him and said that the boy obviously didn't realize the value of the books yet, and Vire was glad to hear that the guards had succumbed to their delusion. In fact, among these many dusty collections was an incredible treasure that the guards didn't even know about. Going up to the 2nd floor and examining the books there, Vire finally noticed something interesting that caught his eye. Pulling out an old and tattered book with intricate letters on the cover, the boy realized he had found the book he was looking for, titled Hidden Ambush. This was a book of the basics of the first level of swordsmanship that even the native children of the family wouldn't see, but because of some torn out pages, it's not really important anymore. Flipping through the pages of the book and smiling wickedly, Vire looked contentedly at the one, for he knew its true value. In a past life, a squad of Vire's hounds found a strange artifact in a dungeon that was located on the border of Red Black Mountain. This artifact was a passage from a sword manual. One of the torn pages was written in Baskerville's handwriting. When Hugo sensed that this was no ordinary leaf, he turned over the entire mansion library to find the corresponding book, that is, the Hidden Ambush. Perhaps this book was created by one of Baskerville's ancestors and describes a way to reach the 10th level of swordsmanship. Eager to reach the 10th level, Hugo unleashed his hunting dogs and found the location of the remaining 6 pages torn from this book. These pages were in 6 families like the Baskerville family, and Hugo declared war on these families by releasing hunting dogs to fight against their enemies. The hound dogs managed to deliver the remaining pages to Hugo, but this was possible because they sacrificed a huge number of hounds. The reward for his work was a single phrase from Hugo, who said that the hunting dogs had handled it well without regretting their losses at all. Remembering this, Vire resented how miserable his past life had been, for Hugo had managed to move from the 7th to the 9th level at the cost of the lives of many dogs. The boy was determined not to let that happen in this life because he was the dog who had found all the pages and knew their contents, and now he had access to the book. Reading the lines about the first step to the 10th level coinciding with the solar eclipse, Vire thought that the person reading it would find the book pointless. However, if you put the information of the book together with what is written from the torn-out pages, the content of the book begins to add up to a puzzle, creating a marvelous masterpiece. The boy decided to reach his former strength before the age of 15 because in his past life he was a graduate of the elementary level, and now he wanted to have the highest level. Studying this important book diligently, Vire didn't notice how quickly the time flew by, and the darkness outside the windows was replaced by bright light, and morning came abruptly. Closing the textbook, the boy decided that he had read enough, so it was time to call it a day and leave the mansion library. Seeing that it was a new day, Vire realized that he had spent the whole day reading, but he was able to read the whole book and memorize all the necessary information. Rising from the floor, the boy did not feel the presence of guards and realized that no one would interfere with him, and he could test his new knowledge. Vire realized that he could not acquire all 10 fangs in such a young body, but at least there was a chance to reach the 5th level not available to him in his previous life. Born a bastard son in a previous life, Vire's relatives condemned him for his lack of swordsmanship without regard to his merit. Not wanting to live such a life again, the boy opened all his fangs and concentrated all his strength to open the 5th fang and attack the imaginary opponent. Of course, in the place of his opponent, he imagined the appearance of Hugo La Baskerville, wishing with all his soul to dissect him with his whipping and powerful blows. Resentment and anger fueled Vire, and thanks to this and the new knowledge he had gained, the boy was able to increase his power level, and he struck the most powerful blow. When the boy finished practicing his new attacks, streams of powerful aura still lingered behind him. Looking at his hands, the boy realized that despite his current weakness, he had still managed to bear his 5th fang as he had wanted. Vire was insanely happy and was even ready to cry with joy because he finally managed to reach the 5th level of the Baskerville family. Suddenly, the boy realized that his hunting dog's fangs were growing, heading towards Hugo at a speed unprecedented in the history of Baskerville. Now, after such success, Vire had to gain mana, and then he would be able to rise higher than in his previous life. Looking at his hand, the boy realized that his mana amount had also continued to increase after the training, and it was most likely due to the experience he had gained. The liquid aura enveloping his hand signified the level of graduate level obtaining. The boy had reached the entry-level graduate level at the age of 8, when in the past he had only reached it at the age of 30. The graduate level differed from his past expert level, with an aura changing from gaseous to liquid form and having a higher density. Realizing that his sword level had also become higher than in his previous life, Vire was determined not to stop and reach the limitless 10th level. Now, Vire's attack called Piercing Fang could become much stronger and much faster, but it still had limitations in development. Compared to it, the attack called Hidden Ambush had a perfect level of swordsmanship, combining defense and attack without any limitations. Putting the book on the windowsill, Vire thought that he could rise to a mid-level graduate with a high probability if he only decided to do so. However, there was one problem that only consisted of the need to hide the skills from the head of the Hugo Loss family for a long time. Taking something out of his pocket, Vire realized that he must not appear too weak or too strong to get rid of Hugo's scrutiny. This object in Vire's pocket turned out to be a magnifying glass with which the boy projected a ray of sunlight onto the book and set it on fire. The book flashed instantly, and the boy made sure that in this way neither Hugo nor his hunting dogs could reach the 10th level. At the moment of burning the book, the guards suddenly approached the boy, and hearing a strange odor, they asked him where the smell of burning came from. Vire did not hesitate and replied that he had accidentally left the magnifying glass on the book and it had burned, and if it was necessary to report it, he would tell the manager himself. A conflict arose when the guards expressed relief that there were only old collections and admitted it was their fault for not keeping an eye on them. Vire deliberately stated that this collection was not useful and suggested that Barrymore should not be disturbed by it, as he was dealing with the question of the morgue mines. The guards replied that if the boy turned a blind eye to it, they would do the same and pretend the book didn't exist in the library. Heading for the exit, Vire apologized for the inconvenience, and said it would be their little secret, to which the guards readily agreed. Once the boy left, the guards remarked that Mr. Vire was a very good man because he was in their position as servants, and did not want to stir up conflict. Vire was glad that the guards did not investigate the circumstances of the incident with the book and simply took his word for it, not wanting to be punished. After leaving the library, the boy arrived with his report in the head's office, where Hugo asked Vire if he had benefited from the trip to the Manson library. The boy replied that it was probably good for him, and looking at his son with interest, the man smiled and asked how he felt being in the library. After a moment of thought, Vire replied that he felt something sharp, soft, warm, and tiring at the same time. Hugo and Barrymore were surprised to hear this, as what Vire described seemed to suggest he might have sensed an aura. Aura was proving to be fully immersed in the world of blades. However, even the smartest students must constantly work to reach at least the entry level by age 15. Looking intently at Vire, Hugo did not understand what he expected from this 8-year-old and told the boy to demonstrate his skills. Smiling broadly, Vire replied that he would be happy to demonstrate his skills to the head of the Baskerville clan. After the conversation, all participants went to the training arena, where a large number of spectators were seated in the stands. Once in the arena, Vire looked confident and drew his sword, preparing for a showdown. Watching the boy, Barrymore asked Hugo how he decided to test Vire, and the man replied that he wanted him to kill a suitable monster. Hugo Law Baskerville had prepared the hungriest and most aggressive monster for the boy, and at that moment, the gate behind which the creature was held opened. A huge, sinister monster was brought out of the cage to face Vire, restrained by a large number of bulky chains. This brutal creature was an orc of medium threat level C, who looked at the boy with hatred, waiting to tear him to shreds. The students watching were horrified to see such a fierce opponent, as such a terrifying monster was too dangerous for an 8-year-old child. However, if Vire could not handle this monster, the knights would have to help eliminate the orc, who was half the height of the boy. When the opponents saw each other in person, Hugo ordered the orc to be released and the battle to begin. In the next moment, the large and heavy chains straining the monster's entire body were removed, allowing it to move freely within the arena. When the aggressive and angry orc felt free, it became furious and looked at its opponent with hateful eyes. The next second, the dangerous monster rushed to attack Vire, who stood his ground without fear. The orc swung at the boy, but before he knew it, Vire had used his sword and severed the orc's arm. All the students and spectators were shocked by Vire's fighting skills, as he was able to injure this monster so severely with the first strike. Even the orc itself did not expect such an outcome, and roared in sharp pain at the loss of its limb. Vire continued to attack his opponent, striking the monster's legs with another blow. The orc's foot struck the boy with a precise kick, causing him to fall to the ground. As the sinister monster could no longer stand, the boy thought that this time the orc's fast regeneration skill wouldn't be able to work. This would not happen thanks to the boy's use of the Hellhound skill from the second sword slot, which exceeded the orc's recovery power by many times. The audience was amazed by the abilities of the 8-year-old boy, as such power was impossible without the use of mana, and they could not understand how he had such abilities. Gazing intently at the boy, Hugo was also very shocked by his son's skills. Vire looked at Hugo and decided to show the man what he had longed for, the skills he had learned in the Manson library. Vire's newly acquired skill, which he unexpectedly exposed to the spectators in the arena, turned out to be the Aura Blade. At that moment, a snarling and weakened orc, seeking revenge on its opponent, began to rise from the ground to attack the boy. The monster's eyes burned with anger and bloodlust, and it roared loudly, alerting Vire to the danger he was in. However, the boy rushed to attack the monster while applying his new skill called Aura Blade. Watching the fight, a shocked Barrymore remarked that Vire was a rare genius because he had the aura of an entry-level sword expert, which surprised Hugo. The manager was sure that such a genius would not be found in any other clan, but Hugo was concerned and ordered him to stop this reasoning. Barrymore then noticed that this orc was very strange, as it couldn't even stop bleeding with its regeneration. Hugo replied that this was the reason the boy was able to defeat the orc, and the manager realized that the man just didn't want to praise Vire. As they were talking, the boy turned his gaze to them and interrupted to make a request that surprised the head of the family. With a bright smile on his face, the boy asked if Hugo had anyone stronger than this orc so he could show off all his skills and abilities in battle. Hearing Vire's words, the spectators in the stands were horrified, as they had not expected such results from the boy and were unprepared for him to ask for a stronger opponent. As he waited for the head's reply, Vire thought it was better to show the allowed part of his powers, as someone might notice his skills and he might have a chance to get away from Hugo. The boy realized that he had a chance of being sent to a distant district, or academy. Thinking over Vire's words, tension flickered across Hugo's face as he said that obviously orcs from faraway places were not up to his son's level, and at this age, the boy's skills needed to be developed. Hugo was pleased with his son's eagerness and asked Barrymore about the availability of creatures captured for the barbarian's subjugation experiment. The manager replied that there was only one individual left, warning that the monster had been hungry for a long time and had become even more aggressive because of it. Nevertheless, Hugo ordered the creature to be brought into the arena. Seeing this creepy creature, the boys in the stands were horrified, as they had never encountered such foul monsters in person before. Vire, on the contrary, raised his head with great interest and regarded the new monster without a drop of fear. Before the boy appeared a huge, dangerous, and cruel troll shrouded in chains and 10 times larger than Vire himself. Without taking his eyes off the monster, Vire asked Hugo if he could proceed to start the battle, and the leader coldly replied that he didn't care and allowed him to proceed. In the next second, the troll, freed from its shackles, rushed towards the boy. Vire did not hesitate and attacked the monster. The aggressive creature struck first, shattering everything around it, and causing a cloud of dust to rise. Vire, meanwhile, used his agility and speed to dodge the blow and found himself behind the creepy troll's back. The monster didn't have time to realize where the boy had disappeared to, and Vire distanced himself and took a defensive stance. The audience shouted in frustration that Vire had missed a great opportunity to attack the troll from behind but had hesitated and lost the chance. However, Hugo praised the boy's actions, saying that this maneuver was a good decision. At that moment, Vire knew that trolls have excellent regeneration abilities, so inflicting light and non-fatal wounds on an enemy wastes their strength. This is why hunting trolls requires special strategic skills, and the boy was quite good at it. Skillfully dodging the attacks, the troll soon stopped to rest, as it was already exhausted. After seeing the boy's decisive actions, the audience thought he was truly a genius, as at such a young age he could think of tactics to fight such a monster. A bit exhausted, Vire realized that the troll was too slow and not a threat, but at the same time, he needed to put on a little show. Vire needed to eliminate the monster as naturally as possible because if he unleashed all his powers, he was bound to get into trouble. Thus, the best option was to use the troll's power against itself, and the boy did just that. The very next moment, Vire successfully executed this maneuver and remained unharmed while his opponent collapsed to the ground with a loud crack. During his attack, the boy also managed to deliver a powerful sword strike and wounded his opponent badly, causing the latter to howl loudly in hellish pain. Everyone watched the fight tensely, amazed that Vire was able to wound a troll with only a first-level skill when no other 8-year-old was capable of such a thing. When the boy heard this conversation, he thought it was due to Bab's ability, as it would have been impossible to do so with only the first level. At this point, the head said that Vire could stop fighting and not put himself in danger, but the boy replied that he would not stop because he was almost done. Resolutely looking at his opponent, Vire asked to wait a little longer, and soon the outcome of the battle would be clear. The boy also said that he would accept his defeat on the condition that he could not eliminate the troll during the next attack, which puzzled Hugo. After looking at the furious monster and appreciating the confidence and fortitude of his son, the head of the Baskerville family agreed to continue the fight. Raising his sword and centering his aura around it, the boy already knew how much power he could bear. Before the audience, Vire was fully prepared for the monster's attack and wanted to show everyone the scenario of gaining enlightenment during the duel and moving to the next level. In the next moment, the boy exposed the amount of power he needed in front of everyone, and he was especially interested in how Hugo would react to it. With his sword held firmly in his hand, Vire attacked the troll with all the power concentrated in his weapon and took its head off in a second. Seeing the finale of the boy's battle with the troll, Manager Barrymore and all the spectators in the stands were simply amazed and speechless. The lives of the Baskervilles are formed from their sword, and usually, hunting dogs under 15 only reach the first level. After 15, the sword is filled with mana and emits an aura. However, for the first time in the history of the family, an unusual young man was born who was able to reach the second level at the age of 8, while his brothers could only reach it at the age of 18. Smiling happily, Vyre laughed and was pleased that he had managed to defeat the troll and mislead everyone about his true strength. But even this percentage of strength shown to Hugo La Baskerville had left him shocked and horrified. Looking at his son and the monster he had defeated, the man couldn't believe that a boy with no good bloodline could achieve such success at such a young age. It had been a week since Vyre had shown himself in the arena in front of Hugo and the rest of the audience, and now he was sitting in the dining room eating lunch, reluctantly looking at his plate. The boy thought that no matter how much he ate this chowder, he still couldn't get used to it. Noticing how everyone was avoiding him, Vyre realized that after that day, everyone was wary of him, but for such a strong young man in the Baskerville clan, it was only natural. The boy continued to recall with pleasure the expression on Hugo's face, who had frozen for a moment at what he saw and did not notice or hear anything around him. According to the official version, Vyre was an intermediate sword expert, but he was actually level 5 and an advanced level graduate. Looking at his hand, the boy thought that if he added the troll's skills absorbed by Bab to his strength, he would be much stronger than the rank of graduate. While Vyre was contemplating his increased appetite for the demonic sword, his peace was suddenly disturbed by 3 boys coming up behind him. All 3 brothers, known as the Trident of the Baskerville family, looked at the boy anxiously and uncertainly, wanting to tell him something. Thinking that they had come to bother him again, the boy became wary and clearly showed that he was not happy to see the trio in front of him. Vyre immediately told the brothers that they had suffered enough in their past conflict, but he would not hold back. To this, the boys replied that they had come for another reason. The brothers said that they admired Vyre for being able to defeat Cerberus and the troll. Hearing such unexpected words from them, the boy spat out his chowder. Frightened by this reaction, the brothers asked if the boy was all right, but at this point, Vyre thought they were trying to fool him using ambush tactics. Not trusting the boy's words, Vyre sensed something wrong and began to think about how to teach the trio a lesson again. But at that moment, Superintendent Barrymore came silently up to the boy and addressed him, which distracted him from his bad thoughts. Immersed in himself, Vyre didn't notice the manager approaching him and was startled by the man's sudden appearance. Adjusting his glasses, Barrymore looked at the boy again and said insistently that the master was urgently summoning Vyre to his office. At the same time, a fancy horse-drawn carriage arrived at the Baskerville family estate and stopped at the main staircase of the building. On the flag flying above the carriage were 2 hands with red rubies in them, indicating that the guests were people of the Morgue family. Soon, Hugo received the guests in his office, but it was obvious that this meeting was not a joyful and long-awaited one for him, as he was very serious and unwavering. His guest was the deputy head of the Morgue family, Adolphe Morgue, who turned to Hugo and said that he had not changed a bit since they last saw each other. Adolphe expressed hope that the annual event would go off without incident, as last year there was 1 wounded person on each side of the family. Hugo replied coldly that perhaps the young men of the Morgue family were skillful fakers. As to them, an ordinary scratch was a serious wound. Not happy with the head of the Baskervilles' response, Adolphe cautiously replied that their clan was very noble and had a sense of dignity. It was obvious that at this moment, there was a strong tension between the Devil Morgue bloodline and the Iron Blood Sword Baskerville bloodline that hovered in the air. Initially, the relationship between the clans was not so bad, as the previous emperor claimed that magic and sword were 2 complementary components. Based on these words, the Baskerville clan and the Morgue clan organized a joint annual training session for young men from 8 to 15 years of age. However, there was a problem in the form of ruby mines on the border of the territories of the 2 clans, which caused discord between the heads and started a conflict and bloodshed. Looking at Hugo, Adolphe said that he had already heard about the new star in the Baskerville family, and considered this event to be a great happiness for the whole empire. Hugo responded by saying that he was honored by Adolphe's words, but he didn't think there was anything special about the event. Hearing this, Adolphe was indignant at Hugo's strange reaction, as he did not understand the reaction of this unfeeling man to his own son's praise. Adolphe invited Simu into the room and told Hugo that they also had a joyful event in their family because a genius of this kind had appeared in the Morgue family. At this moment, a female figure appeared in the open doors of the room, and a girl with long red hair stepped inside. When the girl sat down next to Adolphe, he introduced her, saying that she was his sister Lean's daughter, and her name was Simu. Then Adolphe told Simu to say hello to the head of the Baskerville family, but the girl did not do so and only stared intently at Hugo. Instead of a greeting, Hugo heard words to the effect that it was he who had stolen the ruby rubrics of the Morgue family, and was obliged to return all the stolen goods. It was obvious that the head of the Baskerville family did not expect to hear such words directed at him, and he was amazed by the girl's rudeness and directness. Outraged at such a loud accusation, Hugo La Baskerville's gaze filled with rage, and he glared angrily at his guests. Adolphe was horrified that Sima had said such words, embarrassing him, but the girl replied that her uncle had been the first to say it when they were in the carriage. Hugo was angrier than ever to hear Adolphe Morgue say such vile words about him behind his back. Wishing to smooth the conflict, Adolphe said that there was obviously a misunderstanding, to which Hugo replied that the girl was still stupid and he had no desire to explain that she had been badly brought up. However, Sima decided not to back down and again told him to return the rubies because they were so few that they were not even enough for her research. Adolphe was horrified by the assertiveness of the girl. At that moment, Hugo could not contain his anger and said to stop it at once because now he was sure that the Morgue family did not teach manners at all. However, Adolphe interrupted the head's speech and asked why he was so rude to the child, as the best swordsman of the empire cannot allow himself to threaten an 8-year-old girl. Hugo replied that it was worth teaching the girl not to be jealous of other people's property. At that moment, the previously invited Vire entered the office and interrupted their conversation. At the same moment, Barrymore entered the office after the boy and reported that the young gentleman had arrived. The latter confidently made his way to his father, Hugo. Looking carefully at the boy, Adolphe realized that this child was the new star of the Baskerville family, who, despite his age, had already become famous. Then, turning back to Simu, the man noticed that the girl was no longer next to him and realized he hadn't seen her disappear from his sight. Simu, lightning fast, got right up to Vire and scrutinized him, asking what he had just said. Looking thoughtfully at the girl, the boy realized that he remembered her name, and recognized that he had known this stroppy person in his past life. This young girl turned out to be the very same Iron Blood Empress of the Morgue bloodline, and even in such a prestigious bloodline, she was called a genius among geniuses. In her prime years, Simu had eliminated the demons and barbarians of Red Black Mountain, and was known for building a wall of blood and ash out of their bodies. The girl was also nicknamed the Incarnation of Power because she conquered social circles with her extraordinary beauty, and even subdued members of the imperial family. However, Vire realized that this was all from the future, and now he was facing an 8-year-old girl who was consistently telling him about her family's ownership of the ruby mines. After listening to Simu, Vire said that the girl had traveled such a long way for nothing, only to throw this senseless tantrum. Watching the children, Hugo and Adolphe Morgue were surprised by the boy's directness, as he was not at all shy about expressing himself freely in front of Simu. Resenting Vire's harsh words, the tension in the room escalated. The girl was very angry because she thought her words were not hysterical, finally losing control of herself. Camu awakened her magic, and said that she was going to explain to this stupid boy that the ruby mines were their property. However, Vire continued to remain completely calm and confident, looking at Camu with a smile. He realized that this was about to be a lot of fun. Using her magic, the girl created a copy of the lands of the Morgue and Baskerville clans, and said that she would explain her point of view to the inconsiderate boy. Looking at the icy sample, Vire looked at the girl in bewilderment as his expectations included a battle with Camu, not a lecture. However, Camu began her presentation by pointing her finger at a mine that is in the common safety zone of the two clans, where quality rubies are mined. The girl explained that the entrance to the mine is on the lands of the Morgue family, and the underground dwelling under the Baskerville estate. But since the structure of the estate does not give access to the mine, the spring belongs to the Morgue family. Camu was outraged that the Baskervilles insisted on interfering with the Morgue family's ruby mining and refused offers of rent for the estate. Finishing her story, Camu reminded him that rubies are used as a magical ingredient and the Baskervilles are not interested in such a thing. After listening to her, Vire replied that it must be a shame for the Morgue family that no one from the Baskerville family would open the doors of their estate for a penny. Camu said that the Baskervilles claimed not to be interested in the rubies, and Vire confirmed this by saying that their interest lies in territories beyond which they should not go. Annoyed, Camu said she would prove to the boy whose rubies were whose, and pointing with her hands on either side of the territories, she showed where each one's possessions were. Then, putting his hand on the borders of the territories of the two clans, the girl asked him who he thought the hand passing through her territory belonged to. Vire grinned and retorted that he knew who the hand lying on the lands of his territory belonged to. Suddenly, he grabbed the girl's hand and said that logically speaking, Camu's hand belonged to him because it was on his property. Not expecting such a prank from Vire, Camu was embarrassed and blushed for a moment because she didn't think he would dare to take her hand. But when she came to her senses, the girl started to resist and asked Vire why she had to belong to him, because the very thought of it was ridiculous. Looking at Camus, the boy replied that he did not say that it belonged to him, but the girl did not understand what he meant because earlier he had said those words himself. Suddenly, after his words, Vire lightning fast pulled out a sharp knife from his belt that was hidden behind his jacket. Adolphe Morgue and Superintendent Barrymore clearly did not expect this from the boy and were horrified, worried that he might harm Camus. Clenching the knife firmly in his hand, Vire gave her a threatening look and said that not Camus herself, but her hand was now his property. The girl couldn't believe Vire's words, and terror froze in her eyes as she felt her life threatened. Even the most callous and unfeeling man in the room was shocked by his son's act. For fear that he might do something stupid, the very next moment, Vire confidently and ruthlessly raised his knife and pointed it toward Camus to threaten her with the loss of her arm. The girl was very frightened by Vire's antics, and immediately screamed and cried, asking her uncle Adolphe to help her. Adolphe Morgue appeared lightning fast behind Vire's back and with a menacing glare ordered the boy to release that one's hand now and step away from his niece. Taking advantage of the moment that the boy was distracted by her uncle, Camus quickly pulled her hand from his shackles and shivered. The girl immediately threw herself into Uncle Adolphe's arms, complaining about Vire, who clearly wanted to deprive her of her hand. Adolphe shouted loudly, expressing his displeasure at the situation because the boy's behavior was unworthy, and this time Hugo agreed with him. Looking at his son, Hugo said that he should be aware of his limits of humor because this case goes beyond all limits. Tucking the knife into his finger, Vire calmly apologized for what had happened, but it was obvious that he didn't feel guilty. Without much effort, he bent the knife blade with his finger, and said that such jokes were quite usual and normal for him and his brothers. Until tears came down from Camus' eyes, Adolphe Morgue continued to be indignant, not understanding how children could have such silly jokes. Realizing that the conflict could not be avoided, Vire bowed and apologized to Adolphe once more, saying that he had no intention of taking Camus' hand away. At that moment, Hugo intervened, saying that it was inappropriate for adults to interfere in children's games, but Adolphe obviously didn't like what he said. Then Hugo said that he had some thoughts about the ruby mines that might appeal to the Morgue family, and suggested they discuss it sooner rather than later. At the same moment, a distraught Camus turned to Vire, and said that she would not let him get away with it, and would definitely strike back. But the boy listened to her words calmly and unafraid of Camus. He didn't say anything back and just smiled at her. Soon, the joint training between the Baskerville and Morgue clans began, where the competitors took their places in the arenas and the spectators settled around. There fought young men from 8 to 15 years old, but the fights of older children were more brutal, being real confrontations in contrast to the fights of younger participants. However, this year at the joint training, all eyes were directed in a completely different direction because there were participants who caught everyone's attention. Everyone looked at the young and brilliant representative of the Morgue family, the well-known Camus Morgue. The second who attracted a lot of attention was no less important representative of the Iron Bloodsword family, and son of the head of the family, Vire van Baskerville. At the suggestion of the Morgue family, a confrontation between two geniuses from both families took place in accordance with the rules of true combat. At last, the bell rang, announcing the beginning of the battle between the heirs, and those were ready to start attacking the enemy. Looking at Vire, Camus Morgue told him to prepare for battle and warned him that she would not spare him. Already in the next second, the girl released her magic, which formed a mysterious circle, and she cast some kind of spell. The spectators in the stands opened their mouths in amazement because not everyone had to meet with such powerful magic in their lives. Soon, Camus formed 4 circles of magic and 4 elements around herself, and thus created a powerful quadro spell. Looking at Hugo hotly, Adolphe said that his niece had simultaneously used 4 magic spells that were beyond the reach of even 15-year-old children. Without making Vire wait for long, the girl released all 4 elemental streams she had formed earlier towards him. The boy easily avoided every element directed in his direction, using his speed and agility to do so. In response to Camus' magic, the boy said that those attacks looked awesome, but he advised her to focus on one spell so as not to waste her powers. The girl decided not to heed Vire's advice, saying that he was stupid and didn't understand anything about magic. The moment Vire rushed to attack Camus directly, the girl built a wall of sand between them in a second using earth magic. However, the boy broke through that wall in a matter of seconds, saying that calling him stupid was too much. A little confused, Camus realized that it was the boasted power of the river Styx inherent in the Baskerville family, for Vire had easily destroyed this wall of sand. Realizing that Vire was almost on her, and she would not have time to repel the attack, Camus closed her eyes and realized her blunder in the fight. But without feeling the blow or the pain, the girl opened her eyes and saw Vire in front of her, who had his hand on her forehead and was ready to slap her. The next moment, the boy executed his attack, and before she could recover from the shock and realize what was going on, Camus flew backward from Veyer's powerful slap. Watching the battle, Adolphe Mord was shocked by what he saw, for he did not expect that the boy's decisive blow could be a slap. Sitting on the floor after the blow, Camus looked angrily at the boy and said that he underestimated her strength, and she would not forgive such a prank by him. Weyer smiled haughtily and said that her forehead was obviously very sore because there was a large bump on it. Camus was very angry because the boy had advised her to give up and accept his victory, or else the outcome could be much worse than the abrasion on her face. However, the girl decided not to admit defeat and instantly erected a double wall of sand between them to buy some time and prepare to attack once again. Seeing the walls in front of him, Weyer heard the girl laugh and say that now he wouldn't be able to break two walls. Determined to refute Camus' words, the boy rushed forward to break down this barrier, and hitting the wall hard, he said he was about to catch up with the girl again. Before she could regain her senses, the girl saw Weyer's hand in front of her, which had broken through the wall, and was once again reaching for her face. Looking at Camus, the boy suddenly asked who the hand in front of her face belonged to, and the girl once again didn't understand what he was talking about. Without waiting for a response from the girl, Weyer prepared to flick Camus again, and brought his hand up to her forehead. Having hit her in the forehead, the boy replied that this hand belonged to the one who was stronger than her, and the bump on her forehead became even bigger and redder. Thus, Camus fell for Weyer's ploy again and fell to the ground with a clatter from a powerful flick. The girl was once again in sharp pain from the boy's attack, and tears welled up in her eyes as she looked angrily towards Weyer, screaming with anger. The girl directed a stream of fire at Weyer, but he deftly dodged, thinking that from such pain she would give up. He realized that he was mistaken because Camus was too stubborn. As Camus dodged the attacks, the boy thought about how to calm the girl down because if he had his way, he would eliminate her in a second, but then there would be an uproar. Noticing the other fighting students behind him, Weyer decided to quickly deal with Camus without getting his hands dirty. Behind the boy's back, a battle was taking place between a stupid fire mage wasting magic and an equally stupid swordsman trying to dissect fire magic with his sword. Suddenly, Weyer's musings were interrupted by an exasperated Camus, who asked why he wasn't attacking. Angry that the boy was distracted from the fight, Camus swiftly headed towards him, ordering him not to run away and to fight her properly. It was at this moment that the fire mage behind them prepared to attack his opponent, and concentrated power in his hands to create a fireball. Finally, the moment came when the apprentice directed his attack against the swordsman, and Weyer realized that this was the right moment to execute his plan. Saying the girl's name, Weyer quickly jumped up to dodge that mage's fire attack and advised her to prepare the girl's protective magic. Not expecting such a turn of events, Camus froze in horror because she did not even suppose that her opponent would win in such a way. Seeing what was happening in the arena, Adolphe Morgue stood up abruptly from his seat and shouted, not expecting that his niece might actually get hurt in the battle. The explosion that occurred in the arena was so sudden that flames and smoke filled the entire space, and all the students became invisible.